You're listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, where you get valuable information you just can't find anywhere else. To thrive in today's trying times, you need the Financial Survival Network, now more than ever. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and get your free newsletter and gift. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.
Welcome. You are listening to watching the Financial Survival Network. Well, just when you thought it was safe to go outside, well, all these things happening in the world. The question is, are we going to face perpetual shortages, or is there enough? It's a good question. It all comes down to survival economics, and you're definitely going to want to hear from my next guest who has devoted his life to this, Daniel Matalon. Welcome to the show. So the first question, is there really enough, or is there not enough of anything?
It's really interesting that you bring up this question, because it came out of an accidental utterance that I made to prospective investors in social impact investing. I think I phrased it, isn't there enough? And there was sort of a ripple in the room, and a lot of things changed in my life and my career at that apex. And our research work has taken us across 22 countries and several thousand hours of conversation since then, to shorten the story, asking people their unique perspective, not on is there enough, that question starts the conversation of what is there not enough of? And of course, what is maybe there enough and too much of? Like we probably have too much fake news and too much hate and that sort of thing. And it has colloquially, in a very grassroots way, started a conversation of the, several hundred and now a few thousand people around the world that follow the work we do, to really transcend scarcity and abundance conversation and start to examine what enough is, which is as unique to you and to me as a fingerprint. And that's even true looking at organizations, nations, and businesses. Sometimes that question is phrased in slightly different words that are more specific to that topic. I'm a social impact investor. So I look to the question of how can we raise $3.5 trillion that we know we need in human infrastructure spending as identified by the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So when I ask, is there enough in a general kitchen table sense, it's is there enough? When I'm talking to impact investors, I'm saying, how do we manufacture $3.5 trillion of capital that we haven't formed?
Well, right now, if you're in California and you're asking, is there enough energy, particularly electricity, the answer is no. If you're in Europe and you're facing the embargo of Russian natural gas, the answer is no. Is there enough energy there? Well, there might be enough at a certain price. Energy prices right now in Europe are 17 times higher than in the United States. So this is kind of an existential question, not just to the developing world, but to the so-called developed world as well. And how do we address it?
We'll begin with what's easiest to understand about us to appreciate, even for those who haven't heard of this term. We're proponents and players of the world game, a concept invented by Buckminster Fuller in the 20th century that we're reviving in a big way. And that's basically how to make the world work for 100% of humanity. And Buckminster Fuller was not an idealist. He was a scientist and a researcher and a mathematician who invented the geodesic dome that we know. Had 50 predictions for the year 2000, 49 of those 50 came true, developed the mathematics for synergy, certainly one of the top 100 minds of all time, you would argue.
Sure.
And he basically proposed that certainly in the capability of nature and resources and universe, we have ample energy. For example, and think about this, he did this without an internet as proficient as we have now, but he mapped out that the amount of energy income from the sun, he called it income, compared to our expense of what we use in energy every day, that ratio was 43 zeros to the right of percentage fraction from how much we spend, dirty energy or clean, compared to how much we receive in every 24 hours from the sun. So he's pointing to the fact that we have a technological issue. And if we look at any scarcity thinking from Malthus to the the MIT Limits to Growth 1972 study that said we'd be in the crisis that we're in right now. It was always based on the technology that we know at that time. There was something written in the late 1800s that said you wouldn't be able to drive anywhere in London by 1910, according to the mathematics, because it'd be full of horseshit, basically. And of course,
New York City was.
Yeah, and the car, of course, changed those dynamics. And what I say to people who question whether there's enough in an aggregate, because I think human beings create scarcity, that's my point of view. But basically, when I run into those conversations, and we're really a conversation about bringing warring parties together in our nonprofit work. And what I say to people is, have we ever run out of a resource in human history that we didn't replace with a better one to this point? I mean, we always say past performance is not a guarantee of future results. So I'm not saying that we couldn't have that in the future, but up to this point, we've never run out of one. We've also never had a migration from one part of the earth to the other in human history where the destination didn't increase in wealth. Because our read on it is that human beings are more providers than they are consumers on an aggregate. And the human beings are, in fact, the real wealth of the planet, not the resources. Because we think that wealth, since you talk about survival and thrival in this podcast, and my partner and I always discuss the distinction between survival and thrival in a variety of ways, Buckminster Fuller called wealth a certain definition that I shortened to survival over time is our ledger of wealth. And if we have survival handled, then it's how much choice we have. You want a higher standard of living, you need a higher choice. Money is a big part of that, but it's not the whole picture. And when you look at it from that standpoint, wealth is really produced by agreement, not by resources or assets as it appears to be in our economic system. So if human beings could become capable of more agreement tomorrow than we are capable of today, we'd actually be able to not only create more wealth, but even more access to wealth. Because sometimes we have a situation where we have plenty and enough, but not everybody has access to that enough. And that's our real issue.
All right. So how does what you're saying comport with our good friends at the World Economic Forum?
I am about making the world work for 100% of humanity in whatever way that I can push that ball. So you will find it characteristically interesting that we have libertarians and anarchists. One of my best advisors is a true anarchist, and conservatives and liberals who all recognize that at the end of the day, whatever our partisan positions are, we're going to have to get to the question of what are we going to do about it? That's the real reason we ask what is there enough is because whatever we determine there's not enough of, we have to get to the conversation, what are we going to do about it? When we put it in what are we going to do about it terms, Kerry, we're either going to our 70,000 years of habitual conflict and war, not necessarily war with a gun, but certainly lots of vestiges of war, even in our language, crushing it, killing it, boom, all that stuff that's in our business language, and replacing it with collaboration and agreement. So when you ask me about the World Economic Forum or survivalists or somebody who's with Black Lives Matter and somebody else that's part of white supremacy even, we are quite capable of bringing those parties together. And those who are listening to my voice can discover this for themselves on our Clubhouse conversations, which are restreamed throughout the internet, where we bring these parties together and try to elevate the values we're seeking for while we debate our policy positions. So I think the World Economic Forum belongs in that. I think the World Game of the United Nations belongs in that. And I think nationalists belong in that because I don't think we have a nationalist versus a globalist conversation if there's enough to go around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I always say if the world doesn't work for some people, then it works for no one.
I think that's really vital that you bring up that point. Martin Luther King, in his Memphis speech, this is on our sources page on istthereenough.org, the nonprofit side, the think tank side of what we do, we refer to this speech where he said an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. And extrapolating from what you just said, I like to tell my socialist friends, and I don't mean socialists in a political sense, but those who sort of think in societal norms and values and things like that, which is what I look at as a socially oriented thinking brain, versus those that are the rugged individualists who look at the liberty of individual rights, right, and lack of oppression and all of that, is that you've got to make it work for everybody. I say you got to make it work even for the greedy guy, right? And think about it. I'm preaching, if you will, a value of agreement over conflict. And if you're really selfish and just want to make the world not work for 100% of humanity, but 100% of your own world, your family, your nation, your tribe, your community, whatever it is, that is really something that's part of that 100%ness that we're talking about. And I don't think you can just stop conflict by saying, oh, let's just stop conflict and love each other. You have to replace it with another game, right?
Let's outlaw war.
Yeah.
It's so profitable now. It is the most profitable business in the world.
You know, I have a bone to pick about the profitability of war. I think our certainly munitions makers and those guys in the military industrial complex, no question. But I think that's an exception. I think the standard is that most of us create wealth and all the ripple effects of wealth that are greatest post-war after treaties. That's why, actually, since I bring that up, we've actually proposed that humanity, not nations, needs a treaty. Not the World Bank or the government or the United Nations, but actual real human beings need a treaty of humanity, which is what we're proposing to launch in 2023.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question here. You know about a Hobson's choice.
Yes.
And life is a series of them. For instance, you're in New York City or on the highway, and there's a backup at the exit. Now, you know that if you just wait online, you're going to be stuck there. But if you go into the other lane and then you go up there and manage to cut in, then you go faster. Except that the very act of not waiting online and trying to cut in is often what causes the traffic jam in the first place. So that's an example of Hobson's choice is basically you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. You know, life is just full of those choices, isn't it?
Don't just survive, thrive. The Financial Survival Network.
Goldterra Resource Corp is a gold exploration company that has assembled a highly prospective district-scale land position on the doorstep of the city of Yellowknife in Canada's Northwest Territories. Goldterra is currently focused on expanding and delineating gold resources at the company's Yellowknife City Gold Project, with a goal of discovering over 5 million ounces. With ready access to infrastructure and multiple high-grade gold discoveries, Goldterra is on track to re-establishing Yellowknife as one of the premier gold mining districts in Canada. Goldterra trades as YGT in Toronto and YGTFF on the OTC. For more information, go to goldterracorp.com. That's goldterracorp.com.
This is the Financial Survival Network. The information you need to thrive now more than ever.
Absolutely, it is. In fact, what you're bringing out very effectively is the conditionality, the situationality, if that's a word I can make up, of the question of is there enough? Because of course there's scarcities here and there's abundances there, and they're different for you and me than it is for somebody in a desert when it comes to clean water. We have a lot of interest in clean water and technology for clean water that's more available than people realize. And so when you're bringing up the Hobson's choice, what you're really talking about are values. And I think, for example, and I'm reporting to you from research in 22 countries and thousands of hours, that when a liberal and a conservative meet, they both value fairness, but they interpret what fairness means and what the context of fairness is because of their partisan backgrounds. And what we found is that when they can recognize the value of fairness or the value of freedom or the value of justice or whatever the case may be, and then go to their policy positions, you can even bring people together to talk about abortion in a peaceable way, which we've proven to do. So in your Hobson's choice, the concept is to recognize that we have what I would call a Hobson's choice is competing values. And when you get to those competing values, let's say if you're all about freedom and liberty, but you're also about safety, what are you going to do when those two rub up against each other? And that's your personal hierarchy of commitment, and it's somebody else's as well. And what we found is that when people start with their values and then discuss their positions, the conversation tends more to agreement than conflict.
Yeah, well, if we could all agree, our highways would be a lot safer place.
You remember when the infrastructure was not partisan?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the idea of government spending for something that has an output of benefit to the private sector and that score was never a question. I mean, think about, one of Eisenhower's greatest legacies is the interstate highway system, right?
Named after him. Yeah.
Yeah, for good, reason. And we think of him as a hero in terms of his declarations against the military industrial complex. And that took a lot of courage, even leaving office, to do. And if there's one thing we do not have enough of in this world, it's courage. But I think that, we have inadvertently, through a lot of reasons, technology and other things that have fostered this, we glorify partisanship, and not just in the United States or Canada. But I mean, I've seen this all over the world, even in a country smaller than 50,000 people, has the same partisan divides and the same glorification of partisanship. And if you glorify partisanship in the hands of somebody else hearing that, and another one hearing it, and another one hearing it, it can lead to violence. And our language really matters, right? Which ways we frame these value conversations and policy choices, right? And I think you're very effective at capturing the essence of what I'm saying and posing that question.
Yeah, well, I'm a libertarian, so everybody hates me, right?
And I'm a provocateur, so I definitely have my detractors too.
All right, you just go out of your way to piss people off then.
I think when I was younger, I certainly found some identity in that. I think my provocation today, and this was very accidental, is there enough conversation that's encompassed my life in the last few years? It's more of a provocation to a platform of safety. It's more of a tease and an invitation, right? Because when I ask you the question, is there enough? And everybody listening to my voice can recognize this, just hearing the question of is there enough, from this moment on, you are personally responsible for that answer. In my 30 years previous of focusing on the world game and these kinds of social entrepreneurship issues I've been involved in a long time, I was certainly proselytizing that there's enough to go around, abundance and all that stuff that, you hear in a great, touchy-feely seminar type of experience. But there's only a certain amount of people that can really recognize that, because there is so much evidence scarcity. But when you pose the question, is there enough, you're provoking a response from somebody. And this is something also liberals and conservatives agree on, is the value of responsibility.
Yeah, agreed. Well, really interesting. So if you want to get involved and further the discussion here, Daniel, how do you do that? istthereenough.org or hashtag istthereenough altogether will take you to a lot of our online presence and digital property. I mean, there's finance and investment people listening to this, and we're a very consequential part of token adoption and education, because a lot of our tools and financial technologies that we don't have time to discuss in this first interaction that people can discover are very much about supporting the, I would say, what's the most important part of blockchain, which is the self-governing aspect of the technology, which we're a big proponent of digital ID and digital identity. People at istthereenough.org can discover our tokenization, also our advocacy. I mentioned water scarcity. We're a big proponent of atmospheric water generation, which can cover the planet with clean water powered by nothing but the sun for less than $1 trillion to cover every human being on the planet, if you wanted to do that math. So we're doing a lot in that arena as well. So istthereenough.org. And there are two things to point out there. There's a survey there. It's a long form survey. It takes about 20 minutes to do, but it makes our case as to why humanity needs a treaty, which we're going to issue 100 million certificates around that concept when we release it in 23. People can be part of the pre-launch. And the second experience, let's say, that people can really get their hands around this is Clubhouse. So if they go to istthereenough.org/Clubhouse, they'll see a series of discussions where we take the possibility, the ambiguous question of is there enough, that you fill in differently and I fill in differently, and we apply it to water. So is there enough water? And we talk about the technology I just mentioned, or we'll have another one called Is There Enough Courage, which I was just mentioning, and bring in leaders of courage. And so the audience listening to me now
can either watch that live interaction on like YouTube or Facebook, or if they have a Clubhouse account or want to get one, they can actually participate in the discussion, ask questions of our panelists or special guests, and participate that way. And then the final place I'll land my plane on this is we have a book coming out later this year, beginning of next year, which people can not just pre-order, but can actually be part of the discussions and deliberations around that book and how it gets promoted to the world, because our concept in the book is that humanity is not as threatened by climate change, tribalism, and inequality as it is by our inability to sufficiently collaborate to meet those challenges. And the book is basically a call to that evolutionary concept.
Okay, excellent. Hey, well, thank you for coming on. If you got a question for Daniel, shoot me an email, kl@kerrylutz.com. You'll find the links to the sites that Daniel mentioned on our site, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. While you're there, sign up for your free newsletter. Daniel, been a pleasure, and great luck with your vast undertaking.
Thank you so much, Kerry. The world game is everybody's responsibility.
Thanks for listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, your solution to today's trying times. For the latest, go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.